Hey everybody, welcome back to Miles and Mentors. We have a great episode lined up for you today with special guest Rob Carpenter, the DOT guy. So stick with us. We're going to learn all about his experience through the industry and get some awesome advice from him to pass along to you. So stick with us. We have a great episode lined up for you right after this on Miles and Mentors.
Welcome to Miles and Mentors, the podcast that humanizes trucking. Getting real-life advice and insights from logistics professionals from all over the industry. We sit down with those seasoned mentors who have put in the miles with a mission to pass on the knowledge gained from years in the industry to you. Now buckle up and enjoy the show.
Hey, Rob, thanks so much for joining us today, man.
Hey, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well, doing well. It seems you've had a quite busy couple weeks in your way, right?
Yeah. It's we did some hurricane relief stuff and then some here and there. It's the regular business, everyday stuff. So yeah, it's always wide open.
Oh, for sure. I hope that hurricane didn't impact your business too much, but I saw the posts and everything. You guys were on the ground doing some great work out there, but did it impact you directly?
No, we're maybe like 3-4 hours east in Virginia, northeast. And I was like, well, we're this close and it's not like we don't have the resources to do it. Like, we're it's not like we don't know CDL drivers, right? And we don't have the equipment. So it's like just I'm on a board at a sheriff's office here, an advisory committee, and we just kind of partnered with everybody we could and gathered what we could and got it down there. So
That's fantastic, man. How did all that go? What did you kind of experience when you were down there doing that work?
I I didn't have, you hear a lot of like, oh my gosh, FEMA's not there. I did not see any FEMA actually, but
Sure.
um, you kind of get like some of it's been politicized. FEMA, I didn't see. I did see some National Guard, but it was limited. But everybody we ran into, it wasn't like one of those "we need you here" type, groups of
Right.
people. It was one of those. They're very self-governing, self-sustaining, self-helping. So it was kind of like everybody we would talk to. It's like we don't need it. Go down the road and give it to Bill. His family needs it more than us. So it's just a different group of people. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Maybe it's the Appalachian mindset. Not sure, but um, I think it went pretty good.
Well, that's fantastic, man. That's so good to have guys like you that are able to get up and go give that helping hand. I know some people said they didn't need it, but I guarantee it made a huge impact. So thanks for all you do in that front.
Yep.
Well, man, so obviously the gear of this show is we want to kind of pick at your brain, get some of that lived and learned knowledge that you've taken away from your time in the industry. So I want to dive right in with you, man. You've had this really fascinating journey. I've had a chance to kind of poke in at and see everything you've done through social media and whatnot. But your journey through the transportation industry, from being a driver to becoming an executive and advisor, could you share with us kind of what was your start in the industry? What initially drew you to transportation and logistics in the first place?
Well, I think growing up, partly, being on a farm with my grandparents, and then you've been exposed to combines and tractors and equipment and diesel and um, you know just general work, and you're familiar. But then when I got to be a teenager, I kind of got into this weird place where the other part of my family were watermen, so I ended up scalloping and crabbing and working the ocean in the bay here in Virginia, and then went into restaurants as a teenager doing what teenagers do. And then I'm like, there's no money in this. And one day I just came home and told my wife, it's like, hey, I'm going to truck driving school to get my CDL, like, officially. And she's like, dude, what? So anyway, I ended up going get my CDL, and from there I just drove. I wanted to get the practical element. My idea is, having an entrepreneurial spirit is kind of different because your idea is not to be long-term drivers. So I
Sure.
ended up doing long-term, short-term driver for a long-term perspective. And I drove for a few years. I still drive now. I just don't drive as much, and especially not as full-time and over the road as I started. But that's kind of where it all began. And I really wanted the practical element of it because I think a lot of people dismiss the practical side of what value you bring as a driver with experiences of being a real driver.
Yeah.
So getting that, moved into brokering freight because I wanted to learn the business side of it. Left brokering, ran some businesses, bought one of the businesses I was running when the guy retired, and sold it, went into private equity, and then here I am doing compliance.
That's a fantastic journey, man. So, you kind of touched on when you got into driving, you didn't have that long-term scope in mind. Thinking back to when you were just getting into that point, what did you see being the next phase at that point?
I didn't know, I wasn't sure how I would like driving. Growing up, you like being on tractors, you like being in trucks, you like the work aspect. But then when you get into being a driver, especially when, I think I want to say the longest time I was ever away from home was probably 56, 58 days, something like that.
Sure.
And that was when I was running basically Los Angeles to Norfolk, Virginia. Just that was the lane I ran consistently all the time. Um, and when my daughter was born, I was like, this isn't logical. You're missing family time, you're missing home time, you have no relationships, divorces and bad
Oh,
relations personally. It's just all the way around not great for a married guy with kids. So I started to look at, all right, having the entrepreneurial mindset that I have, what's the next logical step? And it's like I can drive a truck, I can fix a truck, I know what parts are on a truck, but I don't know the full business aspect of it. And that was kind of where I looked at where can I stay in the operational element but learn the business? And there's not really a better place to do that than the broker side. So jumped in with a friend of mine who owned a brokerage, became an agent. Um, when I started my trucking company, I had the trucks, and my issue was always I could never say no. And it started to spoil relationships because I didn't have the capacity to meet the volume demands I was saying yes to.
right.
So I'm like, I know the answer to this. I'm going to get my broker authority with my carrier authority. That way, no matter who I say yes to, even if I can't run it, I know somebody that can. So that was kind of how it developed.
That's awesome, man. So, I mean, as we're talking here, you can see that you've worn a lot of different hats within the industry from driver to fleet owner, broker, executive. What would you say are some of the biggest challenges that you faced in transitioning from being that driver to managing fleets and running your own business?
I would say the biggest surprise to me, and it was a hardship too, was capital. Like,
Mm.
I think as drivers, I know I thought, I'm looking at people that I'm working for that are making six, eight, $10,000 a week for the truck that I'm driving, and I'm only making, maybe one to 1,800, 1,000 to $1,800 a week driving it. And so I'm the tool that's operating your business and producing this revenue. Why don't I make more? And I think that's the mindset of a lot of drivers. So you're thinking, well, I get the next logical step of getting my own truck and I can make all the money.
Yeah,
Well, no one realizes how much capital is needed to maintain a truck, to insure a truck, to
for
fuel a truck.
sure.
And especially if you start getting into, I never used a broker because I came from a broker background. Even though I was a small to medium sized carrier, I always found my direct shipper work.
Mm.
The problem with direct shipper work is no one has that, hey, give us 2% and we'll pay you tomorrow. It's always 30, 60, 90. Anheuser-Busch has 180-day terms.
Oh,
You
wow.
think about how much fuel you use and how much insurance you're going to pay in that 180 days before you get the first check, and
Yeah.
it is depressing. So that was a big piece. I think even on the broker side, people that get into brokering freight don't fully understand the capital that's needed there.
For sure, man. I can say that just from my time being around the industry, that was one of the biggest eye openers for me because, as an owner operator, fleet owner, I mean, it's one of those industries, there is definitely good money in it.
Yeah.
Where there's big money, there is big expenses for sure. I mean, just the eye opener of how much money it really takes to fill that tank,
Yep. Yep. And cash
There's a lot
flow
there.
is like, I don't know how some carriers are making it right now in terms of cash flow. Like, with
Yeah,
margins being what they are and this just the market being what it is, it's like, yeah, you might be able to make money, but it's kind of catastrophic right now.
that's a fair point, man. I mean, yeah, between everything you mentioned, even insurance rates, everything, it's just there's a lot of expense in the industry that definitely has to be factored in.
Yep.
So, kind of diving into some of your expertise here, we see that you've created defensible risk programs for countless DOT industry or entities. For a new company or fleet owner, what are some of the key steps in developing a risk management strategy that can truly safeguard their business?
I think the mindset initially is pretty important. Like you've got to, I came from like, I think my handle on Twitter is still like white smoke. And it was just because I was known for being the rule breaker. And even though sometimes it would look compliant, sometimes it would be compliant, it didn't mean that I was running risk free. And I
Mm.
think people need to start running their trucking companies the way that an insurance company would run their trucking company, because we've gotten to this place where our society is so litigious that even if you're compliant, even if you're doing everything the way you're supposed to by regulatory perspective, it doesn't mean that somebody's not going to sue you and you're not going to face some exposure. Sometimes even if it's not your fault. So when I'm talking defensible programs, there's things that MVRs are a good example. If you have to run an MVR, you have to run it at the time of hire, you have to run it once a year, but there's no reason why you shouldn't be paying $2 extra a month to run continuous monitoring through Embark or Samba or whoever. To where if that guy has a suspended license or he all of a sudden becomes disqualified, you don't immediately know about it.
Mm.
That's an exposure free program. You have to go above and beyond the regulatory perspective, because there's more to having a risk-free program or a risk mitigated program than just being regulatory compliant.
That's fantastic insight for sure. And I think for a lot of guys that have that onset that they do want to go beyond being that driver and enter that business owner aspect, it is a whole nother ballpark. And stuff like this is stuff that the average person doesn't really think about or doesn't know to think about as they're entering that space to become a business owner and take on all that inherent risk.
Yeah, it's huge. It can close your business. I
Yeah.
mean, not just the exposure side. You've got the litigious piece of it, where if you're looking at just the Werner case in Texas was a great example. I mean, this driver literally, it came down to policy violations is what it came out to. I mean, you literally had a truck driver who was driving safe, 35 and like a 50 in snowy conditions. Another vehicle crossed the center line, strikes him head on, and then they sued the truck they hit. I mean, this truck driver literally had no fault in this,
Right.
and yet they're facing like a 9-digit verdict. And it's things like that that are really insane in the industry, that are also making insurance rates go up. That your exposure is so much more now than it was even when I had my company 15 years ago or 10 years ago. Um, so regulatory perspective is the same thing. We had a carrier recently. We don't often get unsat scored carriers, but we had one in Indiana recently who called and said, "Hey, I got an unsat rating." That carrier was closed with 100 drivers for 3 months for an
Wow.
unsat rating. 3 months closure for most carriers without good capital, they're done.
Rough. Yeah.
They're bankrupt. So it's like regulatory matters because they can close you for being non-compliant, and all of his violations were hours of service. That's why he
Mm.
got an unsat rating. And you have to ask yourself, is whatever money you're benefiting by running illegal and non-compliant from an hours of service perspective, because it's double weighted for hours of service, is it worth that revenue to be closed for 3 months? And can you recover from that?
Yeah.
So, I didn't think that way when I operated, because I didn't know this side of it as much as I should have. I knew the business side, I knew how to drive, I knew how to fix trucks, but I did not know the compliance side. So, and I certainly didn't understand the risk element of it. So,
Yeah, for sure. I think there's so much to tap into on that side of the industry to really wrap your head around if you're going to take it on as a business. To have industry experts like yourself to act as that mentorship level, I think is ultimately the make or break point of making it in this industry successfully, because there is so much. And as we talked, you know, big money, big expenses, big risk is another pillar that you've got to add into that, because at that point you're talking in today's world, it's sue heavy for sure. Everyone out there is looking to make that buck, and especially with a logistics based company. I mean, you get sued for your assets, you get put out of business or whatever, even if it's a short amount of time. If your wheels aren't rolling, you're not making money. You end up losing your truck. What then? I mean, that's a big hurdle to overcome, and these are all points that 100% you got to be looking ahead for.
yeah. And, if once your record gets so bad, there's that perspective element of it where insurance will look at you and say, "Hey, you're end of year 1 and you had 3 crashes. So we're not gonna insure you for year 2. You're gonna have to find somebody else."
Yeah.
Well, you go to National Indemnity or Progressive or whoever you're gonna use, and they're gonna say, "Well, let's look at your record for the past year from the other insurance company," and they're, "No, we're not gonna do it. Insurance is gonna be 20,000 a truck if you want us to do it." And who can afford that, right? So,
Big money.
um, it how you operate has so much to do with whether you stay in business or not, that I just think a lot of people miss that whole piece. It's just like run until we can, as long as we're making money, cash flow is flowing, we're good. It's not always about that. There's the litigious side, the exposure side, the risk side, the regulatory side. There's a lot that embodies whether you're going to be open next year or not.
100%. So you've mentioned a lot around building high performance teams through high support, high challenge coaching environments. How do you balance operational efficiency with taking care of your drivers and teams, especially in a high risk, high stress environment like transportation?
I've, when I started my carrier business, I had a lot of drivers follow me, and then even when I went and ran other businesses after that for private equity, drivers still followed me. But I think a lot of it is the rapport base. They know that there's a familiarity that you have with what they do every day. And because of that familiarity, I think there's a level of respect that I give drivers that not all industry executives give to their driver teams. So, do I want them to go out and do their job? Do I challenge them to make sure that they do things right? Do I hold them accountable to make sure they do things right? Sure, I do.
Yeah.
But is there also a level of respect there to where I treat them well? And you might get in your truck one day and have a Yeti cup with $200 in it? Yes. So it's a lot of times it's the small things, but they have to understand you just like you have to understand them. They have to understand where you come from. You have to understand where they come from, and you got to meet in the middle somewhere. And wherever you meet in the middle, uh, provided you're doing it the right way with the right intention, I think you've got the ability to keep drivers as long as you want them.
Mm, that's a great point, man. To jump over a little bit to the technology side of things, with your expertise in fleet intelligence and telematics, what are some of the most critical technologies that new fleet owners should be adopting? And how can systems like Samsara or Motive help them optimize their operations?
So I think where I became like a draw in this debate of like who's good and who's bad and what works and what doesn't is two different things. One, when I went into private equity, we were constantly in this phase of growth. Obviously, the goal was eventually to mature, sell, make money, and every time you'd acquire a business, you'd get a new telematics provider. So at one point, we were running Verizon, Geotab, Samsara, Motive, everyone. So I had practical experience day to day with every single one of, let's just say, the top 10 systems that are on the market. And the reason I kind of have always shot for Motive is until I went to Motive, I did not experience a reduction in my overall auto claims, not just frequency, but exposure. So that was why I ultimately ended up taking those 12 vendors and consolidating them to Motive for that reason.
Mm,
So what those systems, whether you choose Motive or Samsar or whoever, what they're doing is they're actually giving you the visibility that you need to be aware of what's happening with your fleet. And if you don't know what's happening with your fleet, there's only four ways you're going to find out. You're going to get a violation, you're going to have a crash, you have a camera that's going to give you the visibility, or someone's going to call and complain. So I've always my decision for that has always been go with the camera, get the visibility, get the awareness that you need to coach drivers and basically mold them into the driver you want. And I've never found a time in our industry where we need that more. A lot of times we complain, especially us old school drivers that were licensed before '05. It's like we have terrible new drivers. Drivers now are not what they're not us. They're not what they're not what the industry used to have. And I think if you want to have that, the only way you're going to make them into what you want is to know what they're doing wrong so that you can help them change it. Now, I think a lot of that goes into how you manage those systems more than the actual system itself. Coach not cop is a big thing for me. It's like I'm not going to come after you and fire you on day one for being on the phone. Probably not even on day three, but we're going to continue to coach you on it. And eventually accountability becomes king. Like if you're not willing to be coached, we got to do something different. But generally, it kind of goes back to that rapport and familiarity piece. Like you show them respect, they're going to show you respect, and you know how to handle the situation, and they're receptive of that. So,
Yeah.
uh, you know, technology on the market's huge. And while I prefer motive a lot, I push motive a lot. They're not the be all end all, right? There's no cookie cutter answer to technology. Your fleet may not need everything motive has to offer. Maybe you just need a Nexar camera, you know. So my answer is not always motive. There's a lot on the market that's beneficial for different size carriers. It just depends on what your needs are. Census what you need, figure out which one meets the needs. But above all, before you buy one, trial everything and make the decision.
Yeah, I think you touch on some fantastic points there. And, of course, nobody likes to, be watched and all that stuff. But like in today's world, as we were already talking about kind of that risk factor and mitigating that risk just in general from a liability standpoint, even outside of trucking. I mean, it's becoming kind of the norm to put these cameras on your car and everything. And it's saving people big time because there is so much risk out there. There are so many people out there just looking to get a quick buck with lawsuits, et cetera. And when your business is online, you just can't be too safe in those factors.
Yeah, I've got them in my vehicle. I have motive in all my vehicles right now. And what was a good tell for me is I teach behind the wheel as well in Virginia for teens, and I don't have the patience for it all the time, so I don't do it as much as I used to. So anyway, I had a CFO who works at another private equity company come to me and was like, "Hey, how can I get motive in my car, my son's car?" And I'm
Mm,
like, "What's going on?" He's like, "My son's behavior seems different, and I want to see where he's going and what he's doing, and I want something that's I don't want to monitor it all the time, but I want the system to tell me, hey, he's on the phone, hey, he's doing X, what speeding or whatever." And he ended up getting it put in his car because he wanted to see what his team behavior was so that he could modify it when he needed to.
yeah.
And I don't look at that any different than me as a commercial driver. And that's coming from a commercial driver. So when I drive with this in my truck, I want to think that like 80% of the rest of the population that I'm an amazing driver and I'm like the super trucker. And
Sure.
at the end of the day, you can't always self-reflect on everything. Like I like to think that I can, but I think that there's things that the camera points out to say, "Hey, you should have checked yourself a little bit at mile marker 231 because you almost caused a crash by cutting that guy off."
Yeah.
And so I think it's cool to go back and look at it. So
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there's a lot of aspects there that prove benefit, for your own learning, for protecting yourself from others, because we know how crazy the roads are in general, right? But from that training aspect, I think that was a fantastic point you brought up. I mean, look at like football teams, right? Like, what do they do to really learn? They record what they do and then they go back and study those plays. I mean, like you're talking about, you could have done better at this mile marker. I mean, what a better way than when you're actually in the field, acting out your profession to be able to see like, yeah, this is somewhere I can improve. The way I handled this route, I could have done better, et cetera. I think that's a great way to utilize the tool and really improve and hone in on your skills.
yeah, and I think your point to professional athletes is a good thing. I mean, these guys make millions of dollars being the best to the level that they got to the pro level of NFL or NBA or whatever. And yet they still record and they still constantly are in a state of
Yeah.
continuous improvement. And part of it goes back to like how drivers are operating now. It's like there's a lot of ego in it, there's a lot of pride in it. I'm a great driver. And some of that is just all in your head. And when you actually can show somebody on a camera and say, look, this is what you did wrong, or this is what it wasn't appropriate, and this is how we can change that next time. And it goes a long way if you actually are open-minded enough to be receptive to it.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Now I know we've talked a lot about mitigating risk and stuff so far, but I did have a question here. I just want to see if maybe we skipped over anything just to cover all of our bases here. So, One of the areas of specialization is exposure and risk management, obviously, coming into this industry. So, for someone starting out in this transportation or logistics industry as a business, what are some of those common risk factors that are often overlooked? Just anything we might not have covered.
From from a compliance and regulation side, I there's different things. We already talked about the MVR one. There's no reason that you shouldn't be paying $2 extra a month to monitor your drivers. It's a common
Yeah.
sense thing to do. It's only $2 a month. In general, they may charge you more if you have a smaller fleet, but generally it runs let's just say $2 to $5. Big savings. Um, Second thing I would say is probably road tests. That's another thing that people just totally, hey, you've got a CDL, you can drive. I promise you, just because people have a CDL does not mean that they can drive. It might be regulatory compliant, but
Yeah.
it does not mean that you should trust the CDL as like the be all end all uh, determining factor on whether you want them in your fleet. Like ride with them, have them switch gears. If you're a hazmat carrier, take them over railroad tracks, see if they're going to stop for the train. Like really focus on some of these things. Like, can they shift gears or are they going to tear my transmission up if you have manuals? Um, it's so many different things that you can go above and beyond on, but those are two of the big ones, MBRs and road tests. But another one that I've found where we found a lot of holes in programs is multiple employer drivers. So if you are getting compensated by more than one employer, or say you're a manager, you're a terminal manager during the day on duty time, and you're driving 6 hours every night after you know, stop managing. That's all time that you have to put into hours of service. Like it's compensated. So if you're going to drive, then you have to count the time you were paid for managing. So, or if you were driving Lyft, you have to count that time. I mean, you can't work round the clock and be compensated for it, and then not consider that part of your program in terms of multiple employer drivers. So, it's there's so much that goes into building defensible programs. Policies is a big one. Having policies that don't get you into trouble. The wordings of your policy. Safety first is a terrible thing. A lot of people talk about it. You can say things that are uh, are less strict. Like safety is one of our goals. That's not a lie. That's one of your goals, but it doesn't mean that that's number one. Because in reality, we're a trucking company, right? Our goal is to make money, or we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have any trucks on the road if safety was number one. So you don't want to put those things in policy. So how you articulate policies and then how you distribute those policies is important. So much to consider when you're opening a business. And so much to consider as you get ready for an entry level, a new entrant audit that you're going to no doubt have to make sure that you have these systems and programs in place. So,
That's fantastic insight. As we're talking about some of this, regulatory compliance stuff, you've had a lot of experience managing compliance for large multi DOT numbered fleets. What are some of the common mistakes that you see small carriers make when it comes to regulatory compliance, and how could they avoid those?
I think small carriers, I think a lot of times they look at, I don't need the 10 streets or the motives or sambas. And whether you're a big or small fleet, again, I don't think there's a cookie cutter answer to everyone needs a 10 street or a driver reach or a haul or a motive or a Samsara. I think there's ways that you can reasonably accommodate what you need. You can use Nexar as your camera if you're an owner operator and you know that you're the only guy driving in your fleet. But I think a lot of people miss how much those systems take off your plate from a technology perspective. You don't think you need it and you don't think you could use it until you actually implement it. Not maybe not for one person, but I would say anything over 5 or 10 trucks, those systems can save you. I mean, the automation in these things can save you another hire, an admin hire, for instance. So um, I think a lot of it is just not truly understanding what is at hand and how you can use those things that are at hand.
Fantastic. Now, as someone who's been a CDL driver for many years, still drives, as you mentioned, what's some advice that you would give to new drivers starting out today, especially in terms of safety and career growth?
For me, I'm always looking ahead, and I've never wanted to kind of get myself into a market that was kind of closed off. I'm not
Sure.
going to say every driver is good for every mode. I mean, there's van drivers that I would never put on flatbed. There's van drivers that I would never put on reefer loads. Um, van drivers I'd never put on a LPG tanker load. But I think everything has a different level of mental, acuity that's required for it. And um, I think looking ahead, if you're a van driver and you're making who knows what you're making now. I mean, just say 50 cent a mile and you want to get up to make more money, then look ahead to what makes more money, figure out what it takes to get into that mode, and then go educate yourself on that. Hazmat's a big one. And it's not just getting the endorsement, it's understanding, hey, it's summertime. I can't fill an LPG tanker more than 85% because we're going to lose too much.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things that go into it. There's math. I mean, not everyone has math as like, I'm a professor at it, but some of it's needed, especially in heavy haul, hazmat. So just look ahead, figure out where you ultimately want to be. If making money is your ultimate goal, then educate yourself on other modes of transportation that pay more money. If driving is not your ultimate goal, look at other avenues in the industry that pay more money but still keep you active in operations. Brokering is a good one for drivers because they understand a lot of the rules. I think the big shift there is you're coming from being a driver who's kind of mentally trained to dislike brokers or to think that they're always out to get you, and now
Mm.
you're going to be one. But you learn really quick in the broker realm that that's not always the case. So just look ahead and figure out where do you ultimately want to be. Is driving your passion, or is it not your passion? Is it just a stepping stone? And if it is, then start educating yourself to get yourself where you want to be. For me, I'm looking ahead now. There's not going to be drivers in, let's say, 30, 40, 50 years.
Right.
I believe that because there's companies that I work with on the autonomous side that the technology might not be there now 100%, but as fast as we've gotten to where we are, I have
For
no
sure.
doubt in 50 years it will be here.
Yeah.
So am I looking ahead to like where am I going to be? Sure. I'm taking SAE classes. I'm working in robotics. So even for me, I'm looking far past compliance on where I'm going in the future.
That's fantastic, man. Now, taking it kind of a step up from that new driver, you've managed everything from household goods, hazmat, heavy haul. What advice would you give someone looking to expand their fleet into different types of freight? What should they be aware of when diversifying their operations in that way?
Know whatever you're going into before you go into it, first of all. But like, there's nothing worse than jumping from van freight to household goods, or from van freight to hazmat when you don't know exactly what that mode of transportation
Yeah.
requires, how much it pays, what you should be getting paid. Um, and then, with household goods, you have to make sure that you've got people that can kind of take that on. Like, not every driver wants to move dressers every day after driving for 5 hours. So, um, just know the ins and outs 100% of whatever mode you decide you want to switch into. And then understand the expense of that as well. So, I mean, it's not always going to cost the same amount of money. Heavy haul pays huge amount of money, but it pays a huge amount of money because it's expensive to do it. There's engineering, there's permits, there's all kinds of other hands that are in this project, from pilot trucks to engineers and everything else. So, um, intelligence into whatever you're going to go into is key.
Love it. Now, we touched on this very briefly, but where do you see the future of transportation or the industry in general heading in, let's say, the next 5 to 10 years, especially when it comes to safety, compliance, and those technology aspects?
It's a tough one for 5 or 10 years because it's you don't really know. You have so many people that are getting into the industry and making the industry more technologically focused.
Yeah.
Um, but I think eventually we're already on the track of robotics, autonomous, radar, lidar, etc. So my big focus has been SAE education and getting myself up to date on where are we going next on that track. So where we are now, but in 50 years, I think you'll have trucks that are 100% on their own without a driver in the vehicle. Um, so I hard to say about 5 or 10 years because we've come
Right.
so far in such a short amount of time. I mean, I remember back in, let's just say 2010, maybe even 2005. I mean, we mostly still had manual drivers out there.
Yeah.
Seeing an automatic restriction was not common. And then I would say the first truck that I ever got into with an automatic was a '06 Volvo. And then it was just kinda talk, like, "Hey, we're gonna go all automatic." And then the next thing you knew, 2010, 2012, 5 years later, 50, 60% of the driver population has manual restrictions. So it happened that fast. So
Yeah.
it's hard to say where we go on there. We just know that 50 years, I expect us to be in fully autonomous trucks, and now we're kinda just on the track. So who knows where we're gonna be in 5 to 10 years on that track.
I think you're dead on, man. I totally see your justification there, and I would be highly surprised if we weren't there at that point either. My guess my one question is, we look at different industries like right now with ChatGPT and all that stuff, right? It's growing so rapidly because so much attention and emphasis is being placed into it. So it's developing very very quickly.
Yeah.
Same as when we were trying to get to the moon, right? We went from that's impossible to just within, I mean, relatively a very short amount of time, we did it, and we've done crazy things since then. Obviously the logistics, the trucking industry is insanely regulated. That's changing all the time. But do you think if that much attention hit the industry, we could make that happen or something comparable happen that much sooner? Or do you think trucking is going to take kind of that slower approach to get it right before they fully adopt?
I think they're gonna make sure it's 100% right before they fully adopt, and I think that's a lot of what you're seeing now. I give EV makers a hard time because I don't think that electronic EVs, as they are right now, should be operating in mountains,
Sure.
uh, in Colorado on Red Mountain Pass, or in Northern California, Washington, and Oregon. In some places, they just don't belong in certain environments. I think they definitely right now have their place, but it's not in certain places. So, um, and I think it's good to understand that everything has its place and everything has its time. And maybe as we improve the EV technology, we start pushing them into Donner Pass. But right now, it's just not it. I
Yeah.
think kind of throttling that back to make sure that you've got a plan is probably more important than anything else. It's just like any other continuous improvement or lean project. You want to make sure that you have a plan, that it's going to work, and here's the entire project management, and here portion, and here is where we're going to end up when it's done. Um, so we'll see.
Yeah, I think you're dead on, man. So obviously, throughout your career, you have seen a lot of things, right? From poor compliance reviews to fatal accidents. Can you share one story in particular where a mistake was made and what that key takeaway was for improving future operations from it?
Um, I can think of mine. I can think of probably a lot more too, but for mine, I what got me into compliance to begin with was I was in a truck crash, and I had been in truck crashes before, and I think part of me being in the crashes that I'm in, whether I was a teenager or whether it was commercial crashes, having survived some of the catastrophic crashes I've been in, kind of gave me this invincible mindset, and it's never going to happen to me that I'm going to be debilitated from a truck or die from a truck crash. And then I was hit by a truck, and when I was hit by the truck, you know, I would say probably 6 to 8 months after that, I couldn't walk. There was times where I couldn't control whether I was gonna go to the bathroom or not. It's those kinda catastrophic things that say, "Hey, wait a minute, there's something more to this." Had the guy who hit me been compliant and not been asleep, and been a legal US resident, with a driver's license, which he was none of those things, um, would it be a different situation? Would my outcome have been different? Um, so with that, there wasn't anything that really changed with my operation except the fact that I eventually sold it. But there were changes with the person who employed that driver for sure. He made sure that he was using E-Verify to hire legal people with driver's license. Um, And it's those kind of catastrophic instances that take place that can change it. But then there's an unsat rating, like our carrier in Indiana, 3 months closure because you didn't run clean hours of service is a huge eye opener. It didn't have to be something like physically or medically catastrophic. It was just catastrophic to your financial bottom line that you weren't able to operate or produce revenue or lease your trucks on somewhere else for 3 months. So you lost a bunch of your good drivers. Nobody's going to stick around for 3 months while they wait and see if you're going to get it together. So a lot of different things can change your mind. But that's also a lot of reasons why I push the tech aspect. Don't let those things be the things that change your mind. Have a good grasp and good visibility on what's happening in your fleet when you're not looking at it, when it's not visible to you every day. And if you don't like what you're seeing, change it. And if you don't like the way your program is run, find somebody to help you change it.
Love it, man. For those aspiring fleet owners out there and drivers listening today, what's one piece of advice that you wish someone had given you when you were first starting?
As a driver, you said?
Yeah.
Oh man, there's so much with drivers that I learned from experience than it was that they taught me in school.
Always the case, right?
Dude, it's everything. Nobody tells you that, nobody tells you about like the showering deal. Nobody tells you that you should wear shoes in the shower. There's so many little things that you don't think about. And the first time I did that, I went into a truck stop. I come out barefooted, and the guy's just looking at me like, what's wrong with this dude? Who walks around in a truck stop with no shoes on?
Right.
And it's just things like that you just don't always pick up on. And especially when you're driving trucks, it's like, should you secure a load? Should you secure a Caterpillar D6 on a flatbed using the rub rail? It's like some people do it because they don't know any better. And as you gain experience and as you work with other people that are going to mentor you to say, hey, that rub rail is not rated, while it's not illegal to do it, it's probably not a good idea from an exposure perspective. So I would say experience has been more 90% of everything that I know. School taught me maybe 10% of what I had to know, but what I needed to know, everything else came from experience.
I fully agree, man. With that in mind, how important has mentorship been to you in your journey, both starting out, and how important is it to continue some level of mentorship throughout?
I think it's important to have old school mentors. One of the things that I don't know, I think it was Mother Trucker who posted this old school driver, and he's like 75, 80 years old, and they're like, hey, nobody will hire him to be a driver. I 100% agree that you should not be driving a truck at 80 years old, because I have videos of people that are dying behind the wheel driving a truck and driving buses. So I've seen it happen, and it's catastrophic consequences, not just for the driver, but for everybody else on the road. But at the same time, can I use that guy and his experience to bring him into my business and use him in some alternative capacity?
Oh, sure.
Absolutely. That guy has a wealth of knowledge. I don't think you should use it behind the wheel on the open road unless
Right.
he's with someone else. But I think he could come in and be an excellent resource for training, generally running your business, giving you guidance. And that's not just for carriers. I mean, that's for brokers too. I mean, brokers are operating in a way that they don't necessarily control the truck or run the truck, but they have some bearing on the truck. So
Yeah.
I think everybody needs a little mentor advice type relationship with somebody that knows what's going on.
Love it. Man, we've covered a ton today. Anything you can think of that we've kind of skipped over?
I don't think so, depending on how deep we wanted to go. But
Well, I mean, you're one of those guys, man. I could sit here and chat with you for hours and dive deeper. So, I mean, we're going to aim to get you back on the show at some point and dive a little deeper with you, if that's all right with you.
yeah, that works.
Well, man, I really, really appreciate you coming on today, giving us some time out of your day and sharing all of your insights throughout your career and journey to this point. I want to give you a chance, though, for some shameless plugs, man. How do people get a hold of you and learn more about you?
You can get in touch with me at TruckSafe Consulting. It's me, Brandon, Jared, and Brian. Otherwise, you can find me at my site, Carpenter Compliance. We do kind of everything in between audits to system development and defensive program development. So whatever you need, we got you.
Fantastic. We'll make sure to get those all linked in the show notes below as well. But yeah, man, thank you so much for coming on today and letting us tap into some of your wealth of knowledge for our viewers. Appreciate everything you do in the industry.
Yes, sir. You too.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for watching. Until next time, stay safe out there.